Hey guys, what is up? James Penrose here for video 85 on my channel, and this video is going to be my second video tonight, like I promised for you guys. It's part 2 of Who Shot Mr. Burns, this episode coming from the premiere of Season 7 of The Simpsons, continuing on from the big cliffhanger ending that ended Season 6 on Who Shot Mr. Burns Part 1. Part 2 is going to be this episode review right now. Once again, it's all off memory, so if I miss some stuff down, comment down below and tell me what I missed out and what you liked about it. So here we go, the storyline from here, it starts off with Mr. Smithers having a dream that Mr. Burns never got shot, he was still alive, and that they were going to go to a motor speedway squad in colour and whatnot, and he wakes up and goes, oh wait a minute, that was just all a dream? Oh, and whatnot, and he wakes up to realise that his house is all a mess and everything, and starts questioning himself, did I do this, could I really have done this, and then the investigation goes on from there to discuss the prime suspects as to who could have done it. The Simpsons have their family meal afterwards to discuss their motives to kill Mr. Burns. Like Lisa was saying, Bart, he broke your dog's legs. Grandpa, he destroyed your home. And Dad, you went berserk when he couldn't remember your name. And well, that's true. Homer went absolutely berserk when Mr. Burns could not remember his name. Just due to the fact that Homer was working as a nuclear safety inspector for 10 years and Mr. Burns could not remember his name once. And then Mr. Smithers really does start to worry, like, could I have shot Mr. Burns on a drunken rampage? And he ends up spotting a gun that he's been carrying all this time. And he smells it and he's been like, oh, it's been recently fired. And he's like, well, I remember leaving the town meeting. He remembers leaving the town meeting when Mr. Burns got shot. And he ran into an old guy outside and ended up shooting his leg. It didn't show if it was Mr. Burns or not the first time, which it wasn't afterwards. I'll get into that later. And Mr. Smithers thinks it was Mr. Burns, and he gets down on his knees. He's like, what have I done? He thinks he did kill Mr. Burns. Then afterwards, some members of Springfield attempt to tear down Mr. Burns' sun blocking machine, which is what he used to block out the sun in his last attempt of destruction. They ended up trashing Shelbyville because of all that. After that, Mr. Smithers ended up going to the cathedral to confess that what he believed that he committed murder against Mr. Burns. Chief Wiggum ends up spotting him and places him under arrest. Sideshow Mel ended up picking up this clue that you know, Mr. Smithers, he watches Part of My Zinger all the time at Comedy Central. He never misses that show, and that was going on while the town meeting was going on as well. So he explains to the cops, you know what, you've arrested an innocent man in Waylon Smithers, that Mr. Burns was shot Friday at 3 PM, the very time that Smithers was at home watching Part of My Zinger, so he couldn't have committed the murder. And the memory starts coming back to Mr. Smithers that, you know, he left the town meeting early so he can get home in time. And what ended up happening from there is that he shot another old, it was an innocent old man, it wasn't Mr. Burns, it was Jasper, the old man, with the white long beard. So they ended up going to his house to take a look at his leg, which therefore Smithers has been taken as innocent, that he's cleared of all the charges, that he's completely innocent and did not do it. So from there, the further investigation goes on from there. The police find a new clue, which was the bullet they took out of Burns on the day he was shot. And Lisa goes to the police station to come up to these officers and say, you know what, I have some suspects here for you that you might be able to want to talk to and maybe get some answers out of. Like, we got Cheeto Puente, we got Mo Sislak, Barney Gumble, Principal Skinner. I mean, they had all great motives to want to kill Mr. Burns. So that's what they do. They talk to all these guys. The funniest bit of this episode was when Mo took the lie detector test. The police officer was like, do you hold a grudge against Montgomery Burns? Mo was like, no. And it said, alright, maybe I did, but I didn't shoot him. Ding! Checks out. Okay, so you're free to go. Good, because I got hot dates tonight. Dinner with Fred. Dinner with Owen. And that was hilarious. That lie detector test was absolutely hilarious. Then Principal Skinner got interviewed. He was dressed like a woman in the bathroom when a pistol was fired and everything. Groundskeeper Willie was interviewed, and yeah, he never did it. I mean, like, why would he want to do it? Because he lost his groundkeeping job at the school. then afterwards, they find another clue of Mr. Burns, and that was an eyelash that got taken out of him. And they want to know who that eyelash belonged to, and they wanted the DNA test to prove who it was, which family DNA. They had the whole town's DNA on file, and it landed on Simpson, the Simpson family DNA. But it didn't specify which Simpson in particular that was. They just pointed at the fingers of Homer Simpson immediately, and they arrested him for the murder of Mr. Burns. And Lisa Simpson, you know what, Lisa thinks, that something's not right. It had Simpson's family DNA on file. It never had Homer's DNA on file. The family's DNA on file. It could have been anybody. And then Lisa goes to the crime scene to try to discover clues and whatnot, until, it finally hits her that maybe this is true. Maybe Homer did do this after all. That's when it finally starts to hit her. Waylon Smithers offers a $50,000 reward, dead or alive, because he's like, you know what, as Mr. Burns' closest friend, I'm sure this is nothing more than what he would want was swift, brutal revenge against Homer Simpson. Homer ended up escaping from the prison guards, and ends up going to the hospital of Mr. Burns, because he wakes up from the coma, and all he could say is Homer Simpson all the time. He goes up to him and he's like, "Oh, you finally learnt my name, eh?" And so on and so on. The police ended up capturing Homer Simpson, with the whole of Springfield trying to catch him as well. Mr. Burns wakes out of his tantrum from saying Homer Simpson constantly. Homer's actually about to shoot Mr. Burns that time, until Mr. Burns says, "You know what, Homer, no, you couldn't possibly do this. You wouldn't have the guts to fire a pistol at me. The one who shot me was Maggie Simpson." He points the finger at Maggie Simpson, the baby, and that's what it meant there. The whole Simpsons family DNA was on file. It wasn't Homer Simpson's DNA. It could have been any Simpson, and it was Maggie Simpson, and that was the big shock value right there. Mr. Burns then explains what was going on. I was on top of the world. All my plans were going to brilliant. Everything was going for me, when all of a sudden I spotted Maggie Simpson. She had a lollipop in her hand, and Mr. Burns was like, "You better drop it right now." I said drop it, and they're fighting out of it. The lollipop gets dropped on the floor. Maggie catches the shotgun that Mr. Burns was carrying out of his jacket. It falls off. Maggie catches it, shoots Mr. Burns, and falls on the sundial. And it basically concludes from there. Maggie Simpson was the one that shot Mr. Burns. That was a lot to cover in terms of storyline, but these two episodes really solidified Mr. Burns' historic character in The Simpsons as this evil, dominating 104-year-old who will do whatever it takes to gain control and power over what he wants to do. And that's why he's one of my favourite characters of all time in The Simpsons. Yes, this video, to me, it felt like it dragged on, but I just wanted to get this video out there because I said I would, and it's out there now. So this has been my review of part 2 on Who Shot Mr. Burns, Season 7. Like, comment, subscribe. Subscribe also to Alex Wilkerson and Connor Ken, who are two good friends of mine. And yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. All I can say is, peace out, my brothers.